Greetings and welcome to A Body Like Bruce. Today we are looking at the libraries of famous men, one of them being Bruce Lee. When you picture Bruce Lee, what do you see? Probably an explosive series of kicks, punches and kung fu moves that could take out an entire gang of bad guys. What you likely don't picture is a man quietly reading a philosophy book while a household is in chaos around him, kids yelling and playing, doors slamming, adults conversing. And yet that version of Bruce Lee is just as true as the dynamic, high energy version. Lee was in fact a bibliophile, ultimately collecting a library of over 2,500 titles. This included books in obvious categories like martial arts, boxing and fencing, but also not so obvious genres like philosophy, both Eastern and Western, psychology and classic American self-help. Yeah, and in this picture, if you expanded it, you would see that he had a book on his shelf about Islam. Yeah, it might be a bit hard to do with this particular one, but there are other ones you can actually see this book about Islam. Let's take a look at the reading life of Bruce Lee, followed by some titles he is known to have read, enjoyed and learned from. The reading life of Bruce Lee. There he is, sitting in his vast collection in his home with his many books. From nearly the moment of his birth in 1940, Bruce was a fury of energy. As a youngster, he earned a nickname which translates to never sit still. And yet there was one thing that could calm him down and hold his attention for hours on end: comic books, especially of the kung fu variety. From there he graduated into reading Chinese wuxia, what biographer Matthew Polly calls sword and sorcery, martial arts and novels. There's one in particular that he read, and it seemed to predict his life, which he realised. It's like a superhero comic. His spare time was consumed with reading and frequenting bookstores. Before Kung Fu took hold of his life, he even dreamed of owning a used bookstore himself. Even though he had a great relationship with books, he was a pretty terrible student at school. Matthew Polly notes he was a particularly poor student, one of the worst in his class, even getting expelled once. Like many notable men throughout history, an aptitude for reading did not mean an excellence or even an interest in compulsory schooling. It was during college, as is the case for many of us, that Lee's mind was opened up to new ideas and subjects. Even though he didn't graduate, Lee took classes in philosophy and psychology that particularly piqued his interest. Neither of those were his major, which was drama, but he interestingly later claimed that he studied philosophy in school. He would not only read but copiously take notes, add neat underlining, sometimes even using a ruler, and marginalia, and transcribe his favourite passages into notebooks. He was not a mere consumer of text but actively engaged and wrestled with new ideas, letting the great conversation shape his own philosophy and thinking. After college, reading became part of his regular daily routine. He never held a true 9-to-5 job, so his days were pretty free to be whatever he made them. In the mornings he'd work out, running and doing a certain number of kicks, jabs, punches, etc. The afternoons were reserved for either reading or making social calls, and in the evening he'd spend time with his family, lift weights a few times a week, or continue his reading. He cultivated both mind and body every single day. While he read broadly his whole life, there were periods of time where he dove deeply into a single topic, looking to achieve mastery, gain inspiration and come up with new ideas. When developing his signature kung fu style called Jeet, he devoured not only martial arts titles but also hordes of fencing and boxing theory, combining ideas from multiple disciplines. Like all innovations, his kung fu was not born spontaneously from his head but through an amalgamation of ideas from the course of physical exercise and self-defense history. Another time he did a deep dive was after he had been rebuffed by Steve McQueen on a kung fu movie project. Lee had an idea for a plot, but McQueen couldn't commit to starring because he didn't want anyone riding on his coattails, a classic move from the famously vain and self-centered actor. Lee was furious and became determined to make his own destiny rather than rely on others to help him out. Yet Steve McQueen was cheeky and sent him a photo of himself, a huge photo. Bruce Lee used it as a kicking target, supposedly. Lee was furious and became determined to make his own destiny rather than rely on others to help him out. To that end, he delved into the classics of self-help, putting into practice Napoleon Hill's advice to write down a specific goal and recite it out loud day and night. From then on, he would seek to make his own projects come to fruition and be in full control of their development. Yet another instance of this is when he was laid up in bed due to a back injury sustained during one of his morning workouts. Given Lee's famous energy, he was of course miserable being stuck in bed. He needed something to at least keep his inner self active, so he read the entire works of an Indian mystic and philosopher, Guru Krishnamurti, which at the time was probably 30 plus books. In addition to books, Lee subscribed to the major fitness magazines of the day, becoming an innovator in that arena, as well and working weightlifting into his regimen at a time where that was actually considered an unsafe and counterproductive practice. If you have any doubt about this influence of books and reading on Bruce's life, then look no further than his headstone in Seattle, part of which is an open book carved from marble. As his wife Linda said, Bruce carried a book with him wherever he went. While he'll always be rightly known mostly for his martial arts innovations and movie TV projects, his reading was a foundation that shaped his remarkable life and kept him grounded and true to his deepest values. Let's now take a look at some of the titles and authors that influenced Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee's reading list. While Bruce's library contained thousands of volumes, they were primarily centered in a handful of genres: philosophy, the vast majority, martial arts and other fighting disciplines, and self-help. Below is but a sampling of Bruce's favourite authors and most interesting titles. Western Philosophy, Summa Theologica by St. Thomas Aquinas, possibly because he was attending La Salle College, which had Roman Catholic nuns, ideals, etc. So maybe they gave them that to read as well. An Inquiry Concerning Human Understanding by David Hume, Meditations on First Philosophy by René Descartes, The Undiscovered Self by Carl Jung, Unbecoming a Person by Carl Rogers, the works of Bertrand Russell, the works of Plato, Art of Worldly Wisdom by Baltasar Gracian, Hero with a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell and other Campbell titles, Ethics by Benedict de Spinoza, Maxims and Reflections by Johann Wolfgang van Goethe. Goethe. Eastern Philosophy, the works of Guru Krishnamurti, whom Matthew Polly notes was one of his more important influences. Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu, The Way of Shang Tzu, The Book of Five Rings by Miyamoto Musashi, the works of Alan Watts, The Analects of Confucius, Art of War by Sun Tzu, Bushido, The Soul of the Samurai, Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse and many other Hesse titles, Buddhism by Christmas Humphreys and dozens of other Buddhism related titles, The Chinese Classics compiled by James Leger, all 5 volumes, Living Zen by Robert Lindsay and many other Zen related titles. Martial arts, fencing, boxing, On Fencing by Aldo Nardi plus at least 60 other books on fencing and fencing theory, Aikido, The Art of Self-Defense by Koichi Tohei, Advanced Karate by Masayama and many other Oyama titles. That's Masayama who supposedly fought a bull and killed it with a punch or something like that. But I've seen on the documentary of it, they stabbed it a few times or something, and then he had it, then he ran away. That's what it looked like. A Beginner's Book of Gymnastics by Barry Johnson, Championship Fighting by Jack Dempsey, Book of Boxing and Bodybuilding by Rocky Marciano, How to Box by Joe Lewis, US Army Boxing Manual, Efficiency of Human Movement by Marion Ruth Brewer, Physiology of Exercise by Lawrence Morehouse, Wing Chun by James Lee, who later became a student, JKD student and friend, Acupuncture, the ancient Chinese art of healing by Felix Mann. Esquires, the art of keeping fit. Combat training of the individual soldier by the US Army. Modern bodybuilding by Oscar Heidenstam. American Self-Help, the amazing results of positive thinking by Norman Vincent Peale and many other Peale titles. Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. Dynamic Thinking by Melvin Powers. The Magic of Thinking Big by David Schwartz. As a Man Thinketh by James Allen. The Success System That Never Fails by Clement Stone. How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. How I Raised Myself from Failure to Success in Selling by Frank Bettger. Miscellaneous, Elements of Styles by Strunk and White. Playboy's Party Jokes and More Playboy's Party Jokes. The Red Badge of Courage by Stephen Crane, one of the few novels. Okay, that's about war, right? Good movie, excellent movie. Don't know if that's a John Wayne movie though. The Screw Tape Letters by C.S. Lewis. The Story of Civilization by Will Durant, all 11 volumes. The Viking Book of Aphorisms. The Works of Shakespeare. And you can check out on this website this person's podcast, Brett's podcast, interview with Matthew Polly about Bruce Lee's life, and apparently he wrote and published that book and tried to get hold of the Lees, Linda and Shannon Lee, and they wouldn't respond back to it. So you can have a listen to that based on his book. Okay, here's the sources. Bruce Lee, A Life by Matthew Polly. The Bruce Lee Podcast, co-hosted by his daughter Shannon and Sharon Lee. House of Bruce Lee website. Okay. So there's a lot of books here if you want to tap into the mindset of Bruce Lee. Read all of those. You don't have to, it's optional, but as we said, if you want to really tap into his mindset, think along the same lines as Bruce Lee, then there's a list there. There's one missing, health wise. It's Adele Davis, I think her name is, or Adele Davies, on diet and health. We've got that one outside, a couple of them outside. Okay. Yeah, there'll probably be plenty more books that they haven't included. So listen to that podcast. Here's a podcast, From Novice to Advanced, The Weightlifter's Journey. Yeah, if you like this video, subscribe to our channel, Abide Late Bruce. Give us a like, add your comments below the video, and then share this with family, friends, neighbours, your church friends, etc.